we'll have Chris Messina, and good friend of mine, and obviously some of you, or most of you actually know him as the inventor of the hashtag. You know, the fame goes around the world, but he's now a VC, and I really love the topic that he talks about of the impact of the things that we're building and the product kind of facing perspective. So let's go.
Cool, thank you. Hello, good evening. Really glad that you guys are here. This conversation is kind of the perfect blend of a lot of interests that I have, that I've been cultivating for a long time, that I think are really important for us as, and I guess like, so let me find out who's in this room. How many of you are product designers? Cool. How many of you are AI engineers? No way, 1, 2, okay, great. How many of you are founders? Cool. How many of you are nonprofit people? Okay. Who else is in the room? I know I could go on forever. Any other identities? Computer science, what? Yes?
Data science.
Data scientists? I see. So there's a whole sort of sub-genre within like the computing field, roughly. Okay. Anybody else feel like I didn't call on them that they want to? Yes.
Yeah, community manager.
Community manager.
SF Tech for Good.
Amazing. Okay, great. So part of this, I feel like it's not that I'm coming into this cold, but it's sort of like this is a new event with a new set of people. It's a new community that is attempting to establish itself. And so I think that's why I'm sort of like trying to get a feel for who's in the room, because as I'm sharing my thoughts, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a generalist. In my career in Silicon Valley, I've done a lot of random things and I've been very good at a few of them. I started out as a designer. I worked on developer platform teams. I've worked in the open source ecosystem. I've worked on open formats, open protocols, open technologies. I also worked at big tech companies like Google and Uber. I worked in the digital art space before there were NFTs and after there were NFTs. I was a founder of a conversational AI company that completely failed. So I have all the scar tissue to prove that. I'm now a VC. I invest other people's money in the cool ideas that people like us are building. So I have a very broad perspective and remit. And what I hope to share with you today is, this is a brand new version of a talk that I've been trying to sort of like have with myself and with other people for a while. So you'll both have to like bear with me and also sort of like just imagine roughly what I'm kind of getting at, and then you'll get it. But I just find that like anchoring this in the conversation on AI for good is just a super vibrant topic. And so I'm looking forward to connecting with all of you about that. Okay, with that, let me start this conversation by going back in time. This, again, I've never shared this part of this talk before. It's very strange. You'll understand why it's strange in a minute. I was in Scotland in 2019, in the before times. I was there to speak at a conference in Edinburgh. And speaking of things that I don't do well, in this particular case, I had rented an Airbnb far on the west side of Scotland in a little area called Eastdale, which you guys probably can't even see it because of the sun, but just imagine this is a map of a territory in Scotland on the other side of the world. And I'm zooming in, proverbially in my slides, I've just zoomed in a little bit more into this island called Eastdale. And there's a pin that is supposed to drop. Okay, right there. So in this place where I rented this Airbnb, I was supposed to write a book about this topic, and I didn't get anything done. It was terrible. However, I did visit this really small island where they used to mine shale to be used for the roofs in Scottish houses. Why am I telling you this? Because it's in my head, and I need to infect your brains with this useless knowledge. While I was there, I went for a walk. And it's a beautiful place. It's sort of like if you've ever been to Perth, which I don't imagine you have, it's like the end of Australia. If you've been to California, where we happen to be, it's like the end of the United States. It's like a gorgeous place with just like water when you get to the end of it. Okay, I'm walking around on this lush path with like stones and things and whatever, and I come upon this thicket of blackberry brambles. Okay, like super thick. But these fruits, they look delicious, right? If you ever had fresh blackberries, probably somewhere around here, don't eat them because dogs probably peed on them. But here, there were no dogs. So I did not have to worry about that. And I found this like perfect morsel look at this thing. Like it's, well, if you can't see it because of the glare. Anyways, just imagine the most gorgeous BlackBerry you've ever seen, and my very funny painted nails at the time that matched perfectly. Anyways, super juicy, super great. I'm having this walk as I'm trying to think about this talk that I'm about to give, and it occurs to me, this is where it gets weird, that nature was the original advertiser. Okay, what does this mean? Well, it occurred to me as I'm sort of like doing this walk that everything starts with the sun. Everything in terms of energy creation, at least in our solar system, takes energy that's generated from this big ball of gaseous energy and turns it into something else through photosynthesis. And this is like, basic stuff. You don't need a GPT for this. But blackberries also came from the sun. So literally you're eating the sun's energy from this. And in these little blackberries are pieces of genetic material. What is genetic material? Genetic material are a set of stories that nature encodes in order to propagate the same idea through successive generations. Sort of like the cheat codes for what it's figured out about how to use sun to make cool shit, right? And so the way that this works is that the blackberry as a plant grows. It is stuck in the ground based on where its root structure grows. Now, as long as everything stays in homeostasis, that blackberry bush can produce for any number of generations infinitely. And by the way, as I said, I'm a generalist, so if there's biology that's wrong in this, just go with it. It's a story. The problem for the blackberry and its survival is that if nature becomes somehow, or the environment becomes adversarial to it, it can't survive. So what does it need to do? Well, essentially, it needs to figure out how to recruit legged creatures in its environment to disseminate that genetic material, that story, information, that structure. And so essentially, you end up with things like foxes, or people like me who come along, pick the berries, eat the thing, walk someplace else, and then shit out the genetic material someplace where it can grow. That's the whole vibe. That's the whole idea. Right, makes sense. And so this blackberry, therefore, was the original advertisement. Why was it the advertisement? Because the blackberry fruit essentially needed to protect its root structure. So it developed horns or thorns or prickly things to keep people from actually grabbing those parts. And instead it produced something that had sugar in it that was necessary for the creatures around to then take and propagate elsewhere. And not only that, but the raspberries that were red are bitter. And so you learn that if you chew on or eat the blackberries that are not ripe, that are not ready to reproduce, then you'll have a bad experience. So it's done all the things to basically produce a message to manipulate creatures in its environment to its own end. And that's a plant. That plant doesn't have a brain. It didn't think about it. And yet those are the outcomes that occurred as a result of evolution that started millions of years ago. And no, I wasn't on mushrooms during this whole thing. But it offered me this deep insight into social media, into the technology that we use today, into the way that we try to manipulate others through the posts that we put on social media, to recruit others to our goals, to our ends, to the things that we're trying to achieve in the world. And it occurred to me that advertising, I know this is not a talk about advertising, but advertising is actually an original thing that nature does itself in order to propagate ideas and intentions. Hello, my name is Chris Messina. I live in Oakland, California. I've been in the Bay Area and San Francisco since 2004. My first project here was to work on the launch of Firefox. I also was an event organizer who one day also had never organized an event before. I also started the co-working movement just up the street here. So I've seen a lot of awesome stuff come through here. And mostly I'm currently interested in investing in the verticalized application of artificial intelligence to improve the human condition. It's a lot of big words to say. I invest in AI stuff. Today, I'm here to explain what Artur has given me, which is this founder, product, culture, behavior loop, which I'm going to sort of mangle and change around a little bit, but this is kind of the subject of the talk, and it'll hopefully connect to the BlackBerry thing soon. Okay, let's go back to December 2019. This is a little bit after my BlackBerry experience. Maybe they were tainted, I don't know. Maybe there were dogs that peed on them and that's what happened and that's why I'm feeling crazy. Anyways, I'm gonna play a clip for you from Mark Andreessen that will set the stage for the kind of message of this talk.
And it feels like the internet's impact on culture is just beginning, in the sense of like a world in which culture is based on the internet, which is what I think is happening. It's just at the very start, right? Because it had to get universal before it could set to culture, but that's actually happening now.
Okay, so hopefully you know who Mark Andreessen is, the guy that came up with the browser, who also is one half of A16Z. Now the key quote here is he's
A world in which culture is based on the internet.
A world in which culture that is based on the internet, which on the one hand is like, what the? And also like, oh my God. And also like, huh, okay. Because that means a lot of things. It also might cause you to ask the question, well, how does that even happen? How will a culture that's based on the internet occur? And I suppose I might be able to offer you some insights in some small measure, again, based on my 20 years of experience in the technology world and also having invented the idea for the hashtag back in 2007. So this is the first tweet with the first hashtag. The idea was to essentially create a new type of, symbol that can be used to identify groups or topics in tweets in social media. The hashtag wasn't meant only for Twitter. In fact, I was working on decentralized social networks at the time. We didn't have crypto and we didn't have Ethereum and all this other stuff back then, so we were trying our best to do it without those things. But this one tool, this one idea was meant to be something that could decentralize conversations so that anybody on any place on the social web could contribute to a broader conversation without having to go through gatekeepers. To demonstrate sort of both my bona fides and again some other scar tissue, I presented the idea for the hashtag to the founders of Twitter. This is, maybe you can or can't see it, but Biz Stone is kind of like the guy in the center. Jack Dorsey, who was at the time just an engineer, he wasn't even the CEO yet, was sitting there. And then Tony Sullivan, who was also an early employee of Twitter, was there. Now I'm standing more or less like here, holding whatever iPhone, like 3, taking this photo. And this is an image of Wired magazine where they'd just been featured. So I'm sort of like, awestruck, like talking to these guys who like have clearly made it. They've sold their company to Google before. And I'm like, hey guys, I think I solved the problem for groups on Twitter. Back then Twitter was just like this SMS service, so it needed to be a text-based solution. And of course, Biz Stone, fount of wisdom, was like, it's too nerdy, it's never gonna work. And of course I was like, yeah, you're probably right. But good news, I have lots of nerdy friends, and so us nerds will use it, and normal people will figure something else out. Okay, well, fast forward from 2005, that was actually 2007, until today. And essentially what we've seen since then, since that initial idea, and a lot of my friends were building these platforms, of course saw both the rise and massive adoption of social media. This is a chart that shows that adoption where most people, 80% or more of humans, have had some exposure or experience with social media. In addition, a younger generation is growing up using social media on a daily basis. These are charts from Pew, which does a bunch of this research. And it says most US adults use YouTube and Facebook, half are on Instagram, and of course, again, for a younger demographic, they're using it even more frequently. Now the important thing about this, the important reason why I'm here talking to you, is because this little idea that I had, this sort of barnacle on the whale of social media, sort of stowed away and became part of the broader social media what's the word? Whatever. Lots of people using social media. To the point where, and this is a little bit dated because obviously things have happened to Twitter, but back in 2020 or so, there were around 200 million hashtags that were used every day. And that was just on Twitter, which equates to around 2,300 hashtags used every second, right? So throughout the course of this talk, maybe a couple 100,000 of hashtags have been, produced. So the fact that these things have this ability to scale, this should be no mystery to lots of the folks here, is something that I think myself and many of us who are working on these platforms could not have really anticipated, to the degree that it's of course become commonplace now. And social media has played obviously an important role in different types of social uprisings or changes when it comes to things like the Arab Spring, which we're still seeing all sorts of new consequences of that, to the Black Lives Matter movement, to the Me Too movement. The hashtag served as kind of this mycelial structure that allowed communities to come together and to find each other that previously would have had a hard time to do that with conventional media. It's not like these things are new or weren't happening. They were happening, but there were gatekeepers who were saying those stories aren't interesting, or they're not ones that need to be promoted to the mainstream. And so the hashtag and other tools like it allowed people to talk to one another. And so the products that we started building in 2005, which honestly isn't even that long ago, are now used by billions of people every day. And I was there at the beginning, as many of you are here at the beginning of the start of the AI revolution, the AGI, whatever it's going to be, the start of applying LLMs to culture. Which is why I think it's important to think about what Andreessen is talking about when he says that the world is becoming a culture that is becoming increasingly based on the internet. That's not just like a metaphor. It's literally true. I mean, Reddit is now going to be the thing that most people are talking to through their search engine, which is insane, literally. And so I guess what I've come to kind of understand, to tie this back around again, is that I was kind of like the BlackBerry. You know, I had a small number of resources at my disposal back when I was getting started. I had an idea for how I thought social media could be better and how people could find each other and have conversations that they needed to have. And I recruited others to my cause by showing them the way. I started using hashtags before they did anything. They were just stupid looking words on Twitter. And people were like, what are you doing? Like, you have a typo in your tweet. And I was like, I'm doing something. Like, just trust me, it'll work out. And even if the founders of Twitter didn't believe in me, enough of my nerdy friends did. But essentially, I was using this manipulation tool to cause other people to come to support these ideas. And so this tiny splash that I made back then, of course, have had downstream ripples that have only grown as more people have adopted these tools and technologies, which caused my values and beliefs that were attached to the hashtag to spread as well. Okay. Now, if we take a sample of some of the well-known players in the world of tech, and we look at the founders of those companies, I was going to say unfortunately, but I won't use that word. It just turns out that they're all white dudes, and that they have culture which is remarkably similar. We are quite homogenous in so many respects, and not just in our appearance. Each of them, and the culture that shaped them, has had an enormous downstream consequence on the culture that now we all live in. And it's not an accident. These guys were very intentional in some of the things that they chose to do and the ways in which they designed these platforms and technologies to exploit the way that we think and the way that we behave. What evidence do I have of that? Well, watch this clip from Sean Parker, who was the first president of Facebook.
You know, if the thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them to really understand it, that thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you, more likes and comments. I mean, it's a social validation feedback loop that it's like it's exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. And I think that the inventors, creators, and it's me, it's Mark, it's Kevin Systrom at Instagram, it's all of these people, understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
We did it anyway. It was intentional. And so, and again, Mark talks about a world in which the culture is based on the internet. We have to be very, very intentional and careful about what we actually include in that culture. Because as I've thought about this, and my own role in coming up with the hashtag, it's become more and more clear to me that the founder's culture, whether it's my culture or whether it's Sean's culture or Mark's culture or whatever these guys' cultures are, you start with their culture. And culture is a way to encode a set of values that people will be held up against in terms of a set of standards. We use mechanics or mechanisms like shame to cause people to behave in one way or another. The idea of being outcast by a society is a way in which we create conformity within that culture. And so the founder's culture, where we come from, defines the values that the founders express, which then define the design choices that those founders will make. For example, creating the like button to exploit social validation as a way of getting people to create more content, or social tagging so people feel more in or out, or creating streaks in Snapchat to cause people to want to persist a pattern over time. And as those cumulative design choices are put into products, that eventually defines the experience and the behaviors of the users of those products. So as founders' products become more widespread and more widely adopted, like Facebook and Twitter, they change users' behaviors and they shift culture gradually, but as a whole. And that means that eventually users start to take on the very culture of the founders that created those products in the first place. So it seems really obvious to me, like it's just kind of like present, but then when you step back and think about it, and the role that each of us plays in saying yes or no to certain design decisions, or optimizing for certain types of conversions, or certain types of user behavior based on feedback that we're getting, or on growth targets that we have to meet. All of these things applies to all of us. And so it turns out, at least again, as I'm thinking about this, that the maximum point of leverage is on changing the founder, or the creator, or the people who are building these technologies. It's each one of us who controls what happens downstream. And this is more important than ever, because as a culture and as a society, we are more polarized. It's harder and harder for us to have conversations together with people who don't share our same experience. And furthermore, social media has only exacerbated cultural fissions that have been left unaddressed over multiple generations. And of course, those fissures and untreated trauma are being amplified by the technologies that we're building, specifically in the social media sense. Maybe you can see this comic, I don't know if you can, but what it's talking to is how we essentially are looking for information that reinforces the beliefs that we already have. And then we propagate that in the network, just like the blackberry bush. It has one way of growing, and it's gonna propagate that, and it's gonna create little berries that then foxes go eat and then shit elsewhere to create more blackberry bushes. That's just like the nature of the thing. And we're becoming just like that. We are propagating messages that reinforce what we already think and believe and experience. And we nullify the things that other people tell us about their experience because we haven't experienced it ourselves. The challenge with this is that it makes it harder for us to be patient with confronting other people's bespoke realities. Those are realities that other people live in that are not the same as ours. And in fact, it's completely valid and good that people have different experiences. Having a plurality of experiences is positive. But it requires that we start to become much more aware of our own cognitive biases and the ways in which these technologies exploit them. So this confirmation bias is one of many that are used by these platforms to cause us to behave in certain ways, or that we as product creators or designers or founders use to manipulate the behavior of our users. And the reason why this is so important in the era of AI is because we're only going to get AI that is as good as the people who are building these AI systems and platforms. Right? It sort of like goes to reason that if you're building an AI system that is a conversational chatbot that has a relationship with users en masse, that if you have not developed awareness of yourself of what a positive and healthy relationship is, then you're not going to be able to see the ways in which a machine is causing negative behaviors in your own users. And so my thesis is that we must improve humans first in order to improve AI, which will then gradually, over the long term, improve humanity. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, one idea that I've been using and playing around with is just to think of myself, me, who I am, what I am, how I show up in the world as a kind of technology that I can improve. It's not that I'm like a robot or a machine. Technology is simply the application of science. to solve a certain problem. And I think if we invest in the technology of ourselves, then we can upgrade that technology. We can improve it. We can imagine that it can be better than it is right now, and that we can work on it together. And so I think we can do that by focusing on 3 specific contexts. First is the self. This is the individual and their relationship with themselves. Are you kind to yourself? Do you hate yourself? Do you say good things to yourself? Do you know why you behave in ways that you behave? Have you introspected yourself? Do you understand the weird traumas that your parents have, pushed down on you? And then, of course, once that relationship is underway, then you have relationships with other humans, hopefully. Maybe the AI girlfriends thing are causing great substitutions. I don't know, but I think it's still worthwhile to have relationships with humans. Yes. And so developing your skills to have good relationships with other people is very important. And then once you've been working in those for a while, then having those relationships with other machines becomes much more realistic and relevant. But for example, if a lot of children grow up first having relationships with machines and then developing the skills to talk to their friends or to hang out with their friends or to deal with boredom, for God's sakes, then we're in a world of hurt. Because we need to be able to develop pro-social behaviors, not anti-social behaviors. We need to augment the technology of humanity by designing these pro-social behaviors, by designing self-awareness, self-introspection, patience, mindfulness, embodiment. How do I feel in my body, not just like what do I think in my brain? Of course, empathy, being willing to see the experience of others, as well as to have awareness for how other people are behaving or feeling. And then to prioritize richer and more meaningful interactions between all of these different groups, whether it's machines or whether it's humans or whether it's with yourself. And so as designers, as founders, as product people, as data scientists, one way that we can support this change and to scale it is by thinking about how we can change the culture around us. I was there at the beginning of social media when it was just getting started, and I was completely ignorant to the downstream consequences of my beliefs and my assumptions and my behaviors. I just thought I could create something, put it out in the world, and everything would be fine. People would figure it out. And it turns out that wasn't necessarily the case. And of course, then I saw what happened with big scale social media and the ways in which they had very different values than I had. And those things, of course, have caused me to have this conversation today. So as we've seen, culture affects founders. Founders, just like artists, they want to reflect themselves in their work. Products, therefore, reflect the founder's cultural context. And then through their design choices, they influence their user behavior. And then their users take on aspects of the founder's culture. And so in this way, I suppose it feels like, I thought to say this, but maybe it's true. Each of us then is a BlackBerry. If that feels right to you, try it on. I've never asked for anybody to do that before, including myself, but I'm going to try it. And to imagine, the richness of your experience and what downstream, if someone consumes you, for example, and then poops you out someplace else, what impact that will have on the natural environment around you. That's not how I expected to end this talk, but my invitation to you is, of course, to think about how you can invest in the technology of yourself, myself, yourself, etc., to follow your intuition, to develop your curiosity, ultimately to do the right thing. Because if someone had told me back in 2007 when I was putting this idea out there for the hashtag that it was going to actually work and it was going to have all these downstream consequences, I would have thought a lot more long-term about developing the technology of myself much sooner. And I hope folks in this room also take that idea and you'll join me in this process. Thank you.
Let's do a couple of questions.
Yes, so if you guys have any questions or comments or you want to call bullshit, I'm open to it. But yeah, we have no mics, and so you'll just have to speak up. Yes?
So you were talking about the value of technology of the self.
Yes.
So to me, that's self-awareness.
Yes. That's
All
one
right.
of the things, yes.
All right, so that usually takes a lot of work to develop,
It does.
right?
Yes.
So I have two perspectives. One is, most people are not fully self-aware.
I'm not.
But we're developing this stuff now. So we
Yes.
can't wait until we become more self-aware. So as part of your objective that you want to build AI tools that's gonna help us become more self-aware.
So, to go back a little bit, the startup that I started in 2017 was called Molly. You can figure that out. And the idea was to build a conversational AI that would ask you lots of questions in a safe, non-judgmental space. So you could explore your thoughts, your ideas, in a way where it was protected. I had felt that, growing up, I certainly didn't have or couldn't find the same resources to explore these concepts and ideas. In fact, one of the experiences that I had growing up, I designed my high school's website. And in doing so, I ended up designing websites for all the clubs and for the band and for the Art Honor Society and all this other stuff. And one of the clubs that I designed a website for was the Gay Straight Alliance. Now, this was in 1999 in New Hampshire, which is where I grew up. And I ended up getting suspended for building this website. Now, I didn't know why. I didn't realize this was like such a big deal, but it became a very big political issue where I grew up. It taught me the power of these technologies and platforms in terms of the fear that other people had on them. And I guess I wish at that time I'd had a more non-judgmental resource or source that I could have gone to be like, why is this happening? Like, what is going on? Like, what is the background? Like, I'm just coming into this new, I thought I was doing the right thing. And instead, for whatever reason, I didn't have those resources. So the idea was at the time to build AI that would allow people to have that access, to be able to work through those moments with less, not just like drama, but I guess with a greater sense of awareness, right? And I think it's also the case that these tools can be used to help people build relationships, again, with themselves, but also with each other. And so if you can imagine that there's like a Google Translate just for language, but what about for like emotional expression? It sounds like, in the emotional intonation of this other person, they're feeling scared, or they're feeling fearful, or they're feeling upset, or there's something that's raising in their voice. These are things that I've had to spend a lot of time learning because I was a very rational person. I've always been a very rational person. For all levels of communication was essential to get to a point where you can actually understand the other person. And so if we're going to build digital technologies that substitute or replace communication, that lack the ability to see those nuances and subtleties, we're going to lose so much more than I think we even have an idea of. So yes, part of it is to think about if you're building conversational AI, what are they, and I know that there's a lot of conversations about AI for alignment and this conversation about AI for good is good. But I think it actually has to start with like the humans having that space to introspect and then to encourage others around them to do the same. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, where's Molly now? Were you kind of early? Back in 2017?
The great irony of my experience with Molly, the company, was like with my co-founders, we had done so much personal work, and yet we couldn't get there in terms of aligning on the vision with all of the pressures and stresses, of course, that come with founding a startup. And so it didn't work out. They ended up fine. I left the company, and then they ended up selling whatever they made to Elon Musk.
There's a lot of people doing that idea now.
There are. It's amazing, and it's like mind blowing. And I'm seeing it all over the place, and I'm like, wow, we were just too early, and it probably would have never worked without the LLM. So I'm excited to see it. I mean, I'm tracking at least like 12 to 15 of them. I'm just hoping that the founders who are building those things are also very aware of, and I'm sure many of them have done that work.
Yeah, well, I have a question because I've actually been in tech now for over a decade, so I've seen a lot of this. And when you put up the picture of all those founders, right, they all look the same. What I am seeing now are a lot of more diverse founders, women, LGBTQ, different people across racial lines. But what can we do to help those founders basically, get momentum and scale? Because yeah, with a decade in tech, I got stories, right? And I'm sure that they're facing some similar stories too. So regarding, just more diverse founders,
Yeah.
what are your tips as someone who has been in the game for a while?
First, I got to imagine that there's a lot more intelligence in this room than I might have to answer that question. However, I'm not going to completely dodge. As a person who has been in the tech world for a while, I think what I found has been a both strategic but also really valuable skill to develop is this skill of deep curiosity for all the pluralities and ways in which people learn and make sense of their experience. No matter how someone looks or behaves, there's reasons, there's stories, there's experiences. There's both good trauma and bad trauma, and there's all the things that make someone's story make sense to them. And the more that I've been able to sit with and learn about someone else's experience, the more that I actually have breadth in terms of myself when I come to develop products. And so the next era of technology is going to be extremely strange and isolating, because in a way, we're going to get incredibly personalized technology that meets us where we are and where the level of coherence is going to fall apart. There's going to be a great decoherence because we don't need to build one interface or one product that everybody uses. In fact, we'll all have 12 to 15 agents or bots that are doing things on our behalves that have no relationships to any of our human friends and that we're talking to constantly. The Her movie actually kind of is almost too idiosyncratic by having one relationship. He needed to learn the skills of polyamory to actually make that work, So I guess maybe the next version of this talk is about prioritizing the human relationships in this, because I think, one, I don't want to lose those, and two, building technology that serves people and works with people in all the idiosyncratic ways and all the kind of level 1 to all the way up to level 10,000 of personal development is where we're going to have to meet people with these conversational products. And I don't just mean conversational, of course. The conversation is just one interface for this, but to the degree that these technologies need to be able to meet someone who could be in a state of crisis or challenge, or just they haven't developed their own language of expressing themselves, versus someone who has excellent mastery of self-description and can write a prompt that's 15,000 words long or whatever and knows exactly what they want. These technologies have to adapt to all extremes of personal experience and of access and of privilege and of all the rest of it. And if you haven't seen it and you don't know how to listen for it, you can't design for it.
Thank you. As much as I wish we had more time for questions.
Perfect, yes.
Gotta switch to I knew it was gonna be deep, but I didn't realize the BlackBerry was gonna be deep. It was really deep, yeah. But thank you, Chris. It's really something to think about propagation of the beauty and the richness of life and how we contribute to that fertilizer, right? In a way, I really like that analogy.